As a kid, I loved fantasy. As I've said in a previous video, wizards and swords and stuff like that. I loved films like Clash of the Titans, Conan, Kroll and Willow. Anything that was beasts and monsters was enchanting to me. I loved seeing these fantasy worlds. I'm sure I wasn't paying too much attention to the story or anything, just more daydreaming about the worlds and the monsters that live within them. And this probably started very early on when my dad took me to the video shop for the first time and we rented The Dark Crystal on Betamax. Now go and Google Betamax because I can't be bothered to explain it here. My childhood was filled with adverts for Hero Quest on the TV, mashing He-Man figures into each other while sitting on the carpet in the living room and watching anything that was vaguely related to fantasy, and that's never really changed. Except for the He-Man figures and the Hero Quest. I never bought Hero Quest, I just liked the look of the adverts and then went back to bashing He-Man figures together. Fast forward, and at some point around 2004 I saw an advert on TV. Snowflakes fluttering in the frigid air as a dwarf dug his rifle butt into the snow and turned to walk away with his bear companion. Instant attention grabber to a fantasy dweeb like me. That's right, World of fucking Warcraft. I was instantly intrigued. This was my kind of shit. However, I didn't run out and buy the game immediately and play it religiously because I was 25, playing in bands, smoking drugs and genuinely just being out and about. I also never played any of the three original Warcraft RTS games, so I don't really have any pull from nostalgic familiarity, and was just purely running off the visuals and the theme presented to me. Look at all that cool shit. Even the box and the manual was mystical and enticing with its great artwork. The whole package is just a magnet to anyone interested in fantasy nonsense and video games. But eventually I did buy it and I installed it on the family PC, which meant that playtime was naturally limited. I had a few different friends that played it and they talked about raiding and playing PvP with each other, but it is safe to say I didn't really truly get it in the way that they did. I mean, I did in the sense that it was a fantasy adventure game, it was online with other players and there were two warring factions, but I didn't really get how the gameplay should handle, how you interacted with other people, and what the ultimate point of the game was. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't really dedicate a lot of time to it and I just dipped in and out. I mean, it probably wasn't until I installed it for about the third time, more than a decade later, that I stopped steering my player like a tank with the A and D keys. I was the quintessential noob, and no doubt I was irritating to those around me and embarrassing to those that played with me. I think I must have played on and off in little bits, up until and after the release of the Burning Crusade, and maybe even up to the release of Mists of Pandaria in some sense. I didn't own any of the expansions, just the base game. And over that time, I think I only ever got to around level 45. I think it's because I got sidetracked by the hunter class as soon as I found out that you could run around taming pets, and I probably wasted a lot of time looking for different beasts and generally fannying about just killing random enemies rather than doing the main quests, and periodically wandering into somewhere that I shouldn't and getting griefed by someone who knew what they were doing and smelled my noob blood in the water. But even back then it was already apparent to me that even though I was just about as shit as can be, there was something I really liked about just being able to exist and move through a fantasy landscape and take in the scenery while mindlessly killing things. Taking the deep run tram for the first time or riding a griffin from point to point on this massive map whilst other players ran past me bouncing up and down was exciting. As the years rolled by, my attention moved from fantasy setting to a way more all-consuming and unhealthy addiction, and during this time I drifted away from PC gaming, which I wasn't really that into. I had a MacBook. And into console gaming. I had an Xbox 360 and for a bit I played a lot of FIFA and the odd RPG, Oblivion or something like that, but I wouldn't really call myself a gamer, I just liked games. I mean, clearly I would be classed as a gamer now, as I spend most of my free time playing, thinking about and watching YouTube videos about games, but I don't really consider myself a gamer. You know, like the meme about I am a gamer not because I don't have a life, but because I have many. Shut up, you daft cunts. I'd have less of an issue with this if it wasn't that in my experience, people who seem to want to tie their identity to gaming are almost always stupid, toxic dickwads who are probably also misogynists and cry endlessly about inclusivity ruining their games. Pronouns! Feel free to tell me how much you like my opinions in the comments below. Anyway, around 2015 perhaps, I don't know, time is a flat circle or whatever, and or me not remember good, I bought a PS4. In fact, I remember I bought the PS4 because No Man's Sky was coming out and I was really taken in with the free roaming promises. What a mug. Anyway, from that point in time till present day, video games once again became a daily thing in my life, consuming the majority of my free time. It was at this point I started playing Elder Scrolls Online, which was sort of a midpoint in my journey back to MMORPGs. A more action-orientated combat that, whilst using a basic rotation, was in general easier to get into, and once again provided that ability to exist within a huge fantasy world that I could just roam around endlessly. And I did. I played this fucking game so much that I literally have done lasting damage to my neck that I still have to this day because my TV was at the side of my bed in my room and I spent hours upon hours just looking left. I would play with an old friend and we would run around doing dungeons and stuff and generally having a carefree good time. We didn't really venture into it anywhere near endgame because we couldn't really be bothered to play with other people and we would just get wrecked if we wandered outside any area that we weren't really prepared for. Admittedly, this was probably my fault. My playing partner was far better versed in these things and I was just a big old noob, and he probably didn't want to be embarrassed by the fact that I constantly died because I wasn't very good at keeping an eye on my health bar and I would just pile into battle like a crazed maniac. I still didn't really get the whole holy trinity of roles. I spent my time making a hybrid Templar who could neither tank anything or really do any damage. I wasn't really into consulting guides back then, and I just did my own thing based on what I thought was best and what sounded cool. And because I never really did any challenging content, I was never really faced with the reality of being woefully undergeared or ignorant to mechanics and playstyles and therefore forced to get good. I think the part of my never really getting it in relation to MMOs was tied to perhaps my first experience in World of Warcraft, where by the time I started playing, any friends I had were already way ahead of me. And so, being particularly noobish and not knowing what to do, I was just instructed to set my player to follow another character and then led out of Elwyn Forest past Duskwood and up a path with snapping crocolisks that could kill me in one bite. I was then told to do this or that because they were imparting their wisdom on me, but looking back, I wonder whether it would have been better that I had actually experienced this all firsthand, struggled through the challenges of early levels, of being forced to learn systems and how the game worked. I guess we'll never know. But I digress. After a few years running around in Tamriel, I had reignited my interest in the genre and started thinking about other MMORPGs. But I was still not fully back in, as it were, just reminded of what I had enjoyed all those years before, and the itch would start to grow from there. Fast forward a bit more, and not too long after the release of Battle for Azeroth, but long enough for everyone to have already moved to endgame and anyone I used to play with had long abandoned the game entirely, I reinstalled Retail WoW again. This time it was different. I'd now settled into my late 30s, I couldn't give a single fuck about going outside or what other people were doing, so I spent more time watching YouTube videos and learning a few tricks of the trade, things like controlling all my movement through my mouse hand so that I could keep my other hand free for handling my attacks, like driving my dwarf around like a little meaty car. What freedom. And this time around, I tapped into a different mode of playing MMOs as well. I really enjoyed the kind of relaxed nature of mindlessly just questing around the world whilst listening to something like a podcast or watching the TV or YouTube on a second monitor. I had arrived. I was about 15 years too late, but I had arrived. Sort of. But even though I now controlled my character better and had a better grasp of what the fuck a rotation was, I still didn't get anywhere near endgame. I kept getting sidetracked by trying different classes and leveling alts. I also like to watch TV at the same time as I wandered around Azeroth, so I couldn't really be bothered to commit to anything that required too much immediate concentration, like running dungeons. I had to be in the mood for that shit, and often I just wasn't. I installed WoW for a bit, in an ultimately pointless bit of boycotting because Blizzard turned out to be a bunch of bigoted pigs. But a combination of boredom, realising the futility of such actions in a capitalist world full of shit that I can't do anything about, and a pandemic breaking out, meant that I reinstalled WoW again for a third time, and we were all inside for a few years and I needed something to sink endless hours into, so WoW kind of seemed like the perfect thing, and the new Shadowland expansion was just about to release. Coinciding with the WoW reinstall, I also got into the sweaty part of YouTube that was like MMO channels. By this point in time, the mere concept of a MMORPG was not just a game genre anymore to me, it was also now hitting the nostalgia buttons. As a result, I started jumping into all those shitty old MMOs that were now free, heavily monetized and janky as fuck. I've played loads of these games now, and in all honesty, a lot of them, nay, the majority of them are shit. But I still love them, and this is kind of perplexing to me. For even though I love these games, there is one all-consuming fact that separates me from being a real MMO player. A dark spot that marks me out and makes me an MMO pariah and a forever noob. And that is, I still haven't ever played a raid. Not in any of these games. Not in WoW, not in Guild Wars 2, not in Elder Scrolls Online. I've never played a single raid. I barely get involved in what a lot of people would consider to be the main point of these games, that being endgame. So I have to ask myself the question, why the fuck do I play these games? Now, first off, let's put a disclaimer here that everything I'm going to say is purely my opinion and therefore subjective, which means I can't be wrong, so go fuck yourselves, but also it means that your thoughts are valid, so pop them in the comments down below. I say this because MMORPG fans, in my opinion, can be some of the sweatiest little toxic dickheads out there, second only to League of Legends players, or that one time I played a race in GTA 5 online and a fucking child dropped the N-word with a hard R within the first 5 seconds of the track loading. And that leads me neatly on to my first little topic of moaning. Now, one of the main elements of MMOs, probably the most important and integral part for most players, is other people. So it's sort of strange that they are probably my biggest complaint within these games. Don't get me wrong, I do run dungeons from time to time and the odd group of activity, and I have had fun doing these things, but other people in general are one of the most off-putting elements of the genre for me. Whilst it is just a truth of the internet, or indeed society at large, that if you get that many people in one place at the same time, a percentage of those people are going to be obnoxious dickheads. And with the anonymity of the internet, that percentage will increase exponentially. So it goes without saying that if you're playing an MMO with a decent enough player base, then you're going to come into contact with some people that you don't like. I think that the design of these games does go some way to foster a less helpful and more abrasive environment, just due to the fact that these games are designed to be played over a long period of time. And they're designed to keep players in the game so that they can be milked for money, either via subscription fees or cash shop. The player's time becomes a very precious commodity, and that seems to make people quick to anger and fairly pissy. And no one likes to have their time wasted. So you can kind of understand. So if you need to farm dungeons for drops or other events for materials or items that take a long time to collect, then that means you are going to be less receptive to noobs or sloppy play, as that has effectively wasted your time. So I can understand player frustration, although I would say that doesn't excuse being a cunt to people. Now I might say that MMOs like this are in a way designed badly, especially if things like World of Warcraft, where dungeons seem to be designed in such a way that shortcuts are easy to take, meaning that if you join a dungeon queue as a lowly noob, then everyone immediately runs off into the distance, skipping mobs and leaving you to wonder what the fuck is going on. Or you can stick your head above the parapet and ask kindly for everyone to slow down, and that might work, or you might just get ignored or abused for your troubles. I've certainly experienced Aggie players in Elder Scrolls dungeons, but as far as I remember, the dungeons were sort of laid out in such a way as that you mostly moved through them in a linear fashion, or wasn't able to just bypass whole sections. Obviously there'd be some shortcuts, but in general you worked through it and therefore didn't sort of cause confusion for newbies. I am being rather noob centric here, but I feel like noobs are in for the most abuse in these situations. The horrible feeling of shame and not knowing a dungeon mechanic and getting kicked from a group is shitty and doesn't help to foster helping players into the game long term. I don't like the fact that, I might have to go on YouTube and watch a fucking video on how a dungeon works before I then get to experience it fresh for the first time as it was intended, just so some impatient prick gets to rush through. The other alternative is that you could speak to other players, you join a guild and find friends to run those dungeons with at your own pace, but therein lies a couple of other problems for me, and I will state that these are my problems and probably not yours. Firstly, I don't really have time to dedicate to making new friends online in an MMO. As an older player, I already have friends in the real world which I can barely be bothered to spend time with, and while I could make friends just for the purpose of playing certain content in the game, many of the endgame activities require you to be available for a bit of a regular schedule in order to dedicate the time you need to these activities, and I just don't want to commit myself in that way. I want to be able to play when and how I want to. If Tuesday night is raid night, well, I might just not be up for it when Tuesday rolls around. That's why I like games that allow for a more casual interactions between players. Secondly, I see a lot of dumb shit said in the general game chats. If it isn't just inane shit, it's furry shit or some other role-playing shit that, while I'm very much supportive of, shouts out to the furries, you do you and don't let anyone tell you otherwise, just isn't for me. And if it isn't dumb and not for me, then sadly it can tend to be sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic, or just all of the above. To be fair, that isn't everyone, and it isn't every community, but just like on Twitter, and no, I won't call it X, it takes a special type of person to feel like the world deserves their bullshit opinion and has the fucking hubris to go ahead and post it. Most people probably just play the game and say nothing and chat in their guilds, but trade chat weirdos are a special kind of weird. Although I must say that these days that I mostly just get boosting adverts filling up the chat, and any weird messages just seem to roll by quickly and unnoticed by me, so that's nice. PvP is probably your best bet for an unwanted encounter with an unpleasant person. I guess competitive head-to-head competition would be more likely to breed a bit of aggression and animosity. But let's not get it twisted, I am shit at PvP, properly shit. I don't really get involved in it much, but I do enjoy a bit of PvP in Guild Wars 2, which I also think has an enjoyable and fast-paced combat system. But even in a game with a community as generally nice as Guild Wars 2, it still has some proper bellends lurking within PvP. Shouting at people for not knowing what they are doing when matchmaking with randoms in unranked matches makes you a cunt in my eyes. And I have gotten into the habit of stopping what I'm doing and telling people that when I encounter them. What do I care? I'm old and uncool anyway, so fuck these uppity little pricks. If you're going to shout at people in unranked matches, then A, try talking to people at the beginning of the match, formulating a plan or give a bit of guidance first, if you're so good and all. And 2, if you're so good, why the fuck are you playing unranked matches with randoms and not tearing it up in the ranked with your crew of fellow badasses? I'll tell you why, because you are a cunt and no one likes you, probably because of your cunt attitude. Cunt. There are decent people out there. My Guild Wars 2 guild seems like a lovely little bunch, and whilst being a little younger, well, sickeningly younger than me, they seem genuinely supportive and friendly to each other and enjoy each other's company, and I've enjoyed chatting with them from time to time. So there are some people and some communities that aren't just spoiled by sweaty little gamers. With all that said, you'd think that I would just play a single player game, as it seems that I just kinda hate people. but I do kind of like having them around. I may not play with them, but I want to have the option available to me just in case I want to. I won't do it, but it's nice to know it's there. I like to play games my own way. Sure, some games are more curated experiences and I enjoy them. Things like Space Marine, which I did a video on, go back and watch that, or whatever, where you are on a track and they have made that game for you to enjoy that linear experience, that story they're telling. If you put even a remote bit of freedom in there, I will go off the rails quick. In theory, I feel like this means I should like sandbox games like Rust or 7 Days to Die or Valheim. Valheim's alright as it is. They all still require a bit too much focus for me. I'm not sure I want to spend so much effort making my own fun. I just want to kind of more just dick about endlessly. That's why I used to love GTA. I didn't finish any of those game storylines because I just got distracted and spent my time driving around, throwing myself off buildings and ramps and punching grannies in the face. I want to do things my way. A bit of trial and error, pick a theme and create a character to that idea and just run with what sounds cool. This is probably a big part of why I don't do much endgame in MMOs, because generally you are not rewarded for fucking about and experimenting. If there is a game that thousands of people play, very quickly the hive mind is going to refine down every possible build option until they find the most optimal design with the highest damage output, etc. So this means that if you want to piss with the big boys, you're going to have to visit a wiki and then get told what skills to choose, what order to use them in, what equipment to equip, and everything else in between. I can't help but feel this kind of takes the wonder out of the game. The meta can also exclude you from content as well. You hear stories about players being kicked from raid groups and stuff for not having the correct gear. And to be fair, to some degree, some content you probably just won't get through unless you do have the exact best gear. But again, I feel like this is a bit of a design flaw, but it is what it is. I don't think you can design around and past thousands of dedicated MMO gamers, as the power of the mob will always pull everything to pieces and find the most efficient way to do anything in the game. This includes combat, farming, crafting, making money in the game. Those pesky gamers will find a way. C'est la vie. But I suppose one of the upside of being a solo casual is you can kind of do your own thing and fuck everyone else. The true freedom of not giving a fuck. Now, not all the combat is the same. Some is more action orientated, some is pretty good, but a lot of it, let's say, like classic tab target or RuneScape style click on a thing to fight, if we were to hold it up to something like Elden Ring, then we have to admit that it isn't the best. It can often be quite floaty, sometimes slow, and I guess that is a byproduct of where these games have originated from. It seems that it is a source of disagreement amongst many fans. It is either too simple, too slow, too complicated, too repetitive, etc. I guess that it's never going to please everyone, but I don't know if it has ever lived up to other solo RPG combat. But there are other things that will always hold MMO combat back a little, like considering server lag times or having to devise a system which attempts to be balanced as much as possible over various different classes and playstyles, whereas solo games doesn't have those issues. Anyway, moving on. Grind. Perhaps the most core element to any MMO. So do you like the grind, or do you learn to like the grind? I feel like we are conditioned not to see what is around us, or much like capitalism, just shrug our shoulders and say, that's just the way it is. As mentioned previously, MMOs want players to play them for a long time. So one of the most efficient ways from a design point of view is to create an enormous amount of grind to fill up that time. Collecting hundreds of something that has a percentage chance to drop from an enemy in order to craft some item that will help you advance in the game, that will keep players involved. Certainly cheaper than creating more quests or more storylines, more content. Just have them run about grinding for gold or whatever currency, and then you have the added bonus of creating a cash up incentive for people to just pay to beat the grind. There isn't any reason for grind to be there, But once you have ground, as it were, you might get that little feeling of achievement, even if it is just that you have beaten the game at its own, well, game. I won't lower myself to your demands, game. I will stubbornly grind against you in order to get what I want, or until I give in and pay to make you fuck off. I suppose there is a delicate balance to be struck here in terms of design, perhaps even a masterclass, because you've got to incentivise players to want something bad enough, but at the same time be willing to spend and dedicate insane amounts of time in order to get it. If either of those things are either too long or not appealing enough, then it won't work. Is it also like a badge of honour to show that you have bared the pain to achieve your goals? Sometimes grind is actually enjoyable, or at least you think it is. Because I think in reality we have just found ways to make grind enjoyable. The ability to disengage your brain and listen to a podcast or have YouTube on a second monitor. I'll be honest, I love that shit. Maybe I'm a little bit autistic or something, but I like having several things going at once. But just because I like doing it doesn't mean it's good design. It does make me wonder what a tight, lean MMO would be like. I guess not very long and perhaps not very successful. Maybe you got to make those little bitches work for it to really feel that dopamine. The little masochists. Now, I personally don't care too much for story. I just can't be asked to read the dialogue or concentrate too much, to be honest. This isn't just for MMOs, but all games really. I really wanted to play Octopath Traveler when that was first coming out, but after about an hour of that game I was just ground into the dirt by endless text boxes. Unless you're gonna serve that shit to me in a cutscene, I just don't care. I just want the general gist of what's going on. What we're doing? Killing a big dragon that is going to destroy the world? Alrighty then, let's go. Just mark it on the map and let me run over there and bash something and come back again. I guess much like combat and everything else in MMOs, there's a lot to balance, and so story is just one of those many things that might slightly suffer. One of the problems most common with MMO storylines is that rather than write a story that makes you part of a grand adventure, you are put up as the hero of the grand adventure, the special one who saved the world. Only you know as you play the game and you run around with all the other players that they too are the special ones. So many heroes. There's also the consideration that as a developer you spend time creating a deep story only for your main player base to just rush through it as quickly as possible, strip all enjoyment out of it, optimise the leveling experience for everyone else just to get to endgame. I could see how that could be pretty depressing from a development standpoint. And as mentioned before, capitalism demands that you got to stretch that shit out and keep people playing for longer. Content for content's sake. You know what will make this longer? Go over there and collect 10 cabbages. Now go over there and kill 10 pigs. To be honest, the best stories I have ever heard coming from any MMO have never been created by the developers. It's always created by the players. Like Eve is probably the best example. If you watch videos on the sort of shit that's happening in Eve, that's crazy. But I'm not playing Eve. I've tried. I like the idea in principle. When I log in these days, I feel like I'm just confronted by the sad realisation that anything I do doesn't matter because of my next point. I mean, is there any other genre of games that is more ripe for monetisation? Firstly, you have more costs involved in developing and then upkeeping an MMO, and if you don't charge a monthly subscription, you got to pay them bills somehow. I mean, that would be fine and dandy, but even the sub-based MMOs have the same monetisation these days. Capitalism.
Piece of shit.
You literally have a captive audience that is often, to a lesser or greater extent, addicted to your game. You gotta buy those cosmetics to look like a giant blinking light bulb in front of all your digital friends. I guess another thing is that if you're into MMORPGs, you might well be an older gamer, which means that you may well have disposable income, so prepare to be milked. But then it goes deeper, because if you can get away with selling nice to haves and charging subs, then you can probably push a little bit more. Why not create little issues that you can pay to make go away? Completely bomb your players' inventory space with items to fill it up so that they will pay more, so they don't have to spend half their time sorting through shit. This is prevalent in Guild Wars 2, a game I genuinely love. It's probably actually my favourite. And in Elder Scrolls Online, another game I played a lot of as previously mentioned. In Elder Scrolls Online in particular, all your crafting items take up a lot of space. But if you sign up for £10 a month for the optional sub fee, you'll get unlimited material space. You get other things with it as well, like access to certain areas, but that's the main thing you're signing up for. Unlimited material space for your crafting or whatnot. I mean, if you can afford it, it becomes almost impossible not to have it. I remember going back to SO like I said for a bit, and not long after playing for a while, I was reaching for that debit card to set that up again, even if it's just for a few months, which you will then obviously then forget to cancel for a few months more after that. It is well known that these games create problems that can then be solved with real world money. And we haven't even got to the point where you can pay for level boosts to take you to max level in a blink of an eye. I mean, you don't want to level all those characters again, do you? Just buy the boost for your rolls. And then obviously the most egregious and despised form of monetization, pay to win. Buy the upgrade and play as these two character races who are more powerful than any of the other races that you can play with the standard edition. Buy packs of currency to outbid people at the auction house. Maybe you can even buy more powerful weapons. It really depends on how much the game wants to hide its shameful bullshit. Some just don't care. Why don't they care? Because they have managed to normalise this shit so much that now we all just accept it. We no longer bat an eyelid at many of these practices. It's just the way it is. That's capitalism, baby. The problem is, whilst you don't need to participate in getting your wallet out, you can play these games and never spend a penny, someone has money and someone will spend it. Often there are ways of earning currency in-game and then converting it into currency to be used on buying in-game items, but quite often if you actually do the maths on how much effort and time you have to put in, it starts to get pretty ridiculous. Even in games that I consider to have a fairly fair cash shop and earn as you play options, you will still end up having to turn it into a bit of a second job to get the amount of currency required to optimise your money earning process. You have to do these particular events and that content daily in order to get this, in order to do that, and then we're right back at the meta again, checking wiki articles to find out the most efficient way to grind gold or whatever. Now I know that I've sort of moaned and nitpicked about a lot of things, and quite frankly a lot of those gripes are valid and that cannot be denied. If you don't think whatever your MMO of choice is literally taking the piss out of you to a lesser or greater extent, then you are not being honest with yourself, and you probably are suffering from the classic sunk cost fallacy. You've gone too far to give up now. Like the Limmy mean, don't back down. Double down. I also understand that many of these grind struggles and roadblocks to be overcome in the game design are probably more worth it when you are fully involved in endgame. To work to get the gear for the latest raid and finally work towards and complete it is possibly a real buzz, but for me that isn't the case. But despite everything I have said, I do genuinely love this genre. Despite not even playing half the fucking game's content, despite many of the little tricks and traps that irritate me, despite the genre rubbing up against my anti-capitalist, filthy, pinko, commie, scumbag beliefs, although no entertainment medium is free from that tyranny these days, I do genuinely love these games. Despite all this, I have made my peace. I am a casual, base game enjoying PvE adventurer who likes to dabble on the fringes of group content. I'm a second monitor chill master gliding about fantasy lands with a podcast on. I am a clumsy forever noob and I am absolutely fine with it.